Good evening, everyone. I am really glad that you joined us tonight. I hope you've had a good day and a good week before this. I guess the irritating, obvious question would be if I ask you, is it hot enough for you? Because it sure is. Seems to happen about this time every year. But welcome back, and I really appreciate your being with us tonight as we continue to look at what makes logical sense to believe about whether there is a creator or not. And so wherever you do fall currently with your belief on that, if you're willing to re-examine it, and I hope you are, then I'm glad you're with us. If you are not a member here, or if perhaps you are someone who does not or thinks that you may not believe in a creator, you are an especially welcomed and respected guest here, and I thank you too for being with us. Hope that we will not waste your time tonight. Now, I want to thank you too for everybody who has suffered through me for the first 3 parts of this series. If you have, then you know they were a little bit dry. That's probably an understatement, and I really appreciate your wading through those with me because they were absolutely necessary and important. If you didn't see the first 3 parts of this, I know I hate to put this punishment on you, but I would recommend going back and taking a look at those because that gives you the foundation that we're going to assume you've already seen going into this part. Well, if you've done that, you've kind of paid your dues already, so tonight is where I think it gets a lot more interesting from here on out. And actually, next week with what we pick up with, to me, is where it just gets truly fascinating from there on. But tonight, I think you'll start to get a little bit of the reward for having waded through the first 3 sessions with me, because you'll start to see some of it come to fruition as we start looking at these theories. So here's kind of to bring us up to where we are very quickly then. We're talking about questions that every human needs to consider, no matter what you're inclined to believe about these at the current time. Is there a superior entity who created? Does it make sense to believe that logically, taking into account all that we know scientifically, etc.? And that's the big question that we're addressing. And then the question that would follow after that, if so, and only if we decide that yes, there is such an entity, do we have any reliable communications that we would want to pay attention to? So those are kind of the big questions, and I think you would agree, no matter who you are, at least that first question, that's pretty important. So that's what we're doing. Now, in pursuit of the answer to that question, I've broken this down to me into 4 phenomena that we can observe, 4 major things that require an explanation either with a creator, a superior entity, or without one. And that is these four areas. First of all, the existence of all the matter and energy in the universe. How did it get there? Number 2, the precise structure and organization of the universe, the solar system, our planet, etc., and how did that happen? Number 3, the initial appearance of any kind of life, even if it was just the most rudimentary, fundamental organism, some kind of life. And number 4, then how did that become the diversity and complexity and precision of life that we see currently before us? So with those 4 questions, for each one, our goal will be to examine the competing theories for each one of these things, whether with a superior creating entity or not, and determine which ones make the most logical sense. And we should see either a consistent, sensible answer that yes, it's logical to believe that a superior entity made that happen in each case, or that there was no such entity in each case. But those are the areas that I think we have to look at. So that's where we are. Now, just we'll zero in on these, but just to show you where we've been before, down the left side there are these 4 questions or phenomena that we've said, and then for each one, some of the various theories that we might look at. So I just put that up as a memory refresher as to where we started, and tonight is when we do start zeroing in on the first of those. So we talked quite a bit about how can we determine what is true. That is what everything rests on, and that's what we spent especially the second and third parts looking at. And here's a little bit of what we said with that. I know that you can't read that. Later on, you may want to look at it in some of the notes, but let me just quickly run through that again because that is so important to our quest and going forward. First is that on any given question, all hypotheses that are seriously proposed must be considered and submitted to or subjected to critical analysis. Okay? We cannot, if we're searching for the truth on anything, we cannot refuse to consider a hypothesis for any reason, because we don't like it, because we don't think it's likely. No, that's what we're here for. We look at all of them. And if I'm inclined to believe in God, I have to give respectful, serious, fair, and full consideration to atheistic theories, because what if I'm wrong? Okay, and vice versa. So that's number one. Number two, anytime it is possible to employ the scientific method and do direct experimental testing, it's what you ought to do. If you can do it, you ought to. There's nothing better than that, using the brain and the intellect that you have, the good logic that you're capable of, to see what makes sense and what is a false claim. Number three, in many areas where that's just not possible, then you need to apply critical analysis to any other source of evidence and logic that you can, including maybe direct observation, even if you can't do an experiment, but you can see something happen or not happen. That's almost as good. Another would be compatibility of the hypothesis with things that you know to be the case in the world around you, including scientifically. And the next one would be, in some cases, witness testimony. As you see, this is a method designed to be able to help us determine the truth on any question in any area of life. Perhaps witness testimony or scientific and historical evidence, including indirect observation maybe in some cases. And with each of those, you have to then, if you can't observe it directly, assess the credibility of the source that you're looking at and scrutinizing with healthy skepticism. That is to say, you don't believe everything you hear, because sometimes people lie, etc., but you're open to considering everything and deciding what makes sense, logical sense. And as I've said, that has to include bias detection, because sometimes you have to figure out why somebody might be telling you something, even if they're not intentionally lying, that might not be accurate, and that can happen. Number four, a hypothesis can be refined or tweaked a little bit if there are some minor problems with it, but that don't disqualify the whole thing as being nonsense. Okay, you can fine-tune it. Number five, and this is also critically important, any hypothesis which is fatally flawed, and that is, in light of the above, there's a reason that it just cannot make sense, that it is falsified by testing or direct observation, or it's just plain incompatible with what you know to be physically and scientifically true, etc., then you discard that hypothesis and say, nice try, but that one didn't turn out to be correct. Number six, the remaining hypothesis which is most compatible with the available evidence and holds the greatest explanatory power, has the best explanation for what we're observing, may be accepted until and unless you can find one that is even superior to it. And there can be no preferred outcomes. There can be no a priori considerations if we're actually looking for the truth, because that will blind us and directly prevent us from finding the truth. And we're not taking a popularity vote on what's true. We need to do something better than that. We looked at a quote showing you why things can go wrong so often with inquiry into these areas, and quite often it's because somebody has said, nope, I refuse to consider any explanation or any hypothesis that would involve the existence of a superior entity, a supernatural being. Well, I may ask you then, on what valid basis can you refuse to consider that and still claim that you're looking for the truth? You can't. Just like I can't refuse to consider atheistic theories if I'm really looking for the truth. So there was an interesting quote there that really kind of laid it out. And I do encourage you, if you haven't seen it, to go back and take a look at those. Okay, so that's where we are. And we're looking then at these major theories or hypotheses. I'm going to use those terms pretty interchangeably, or explanations, whatever, for these four major phenomena and questions. Well, let's finally then start zooming in on each one of them. So the first one is, the existence of all the matter and energy in the universe. How in the world can we explain that? Okay, here are the choices that we're going to look at, and a couple of them I'm going to very quickly discard, but I've just put them on there for the sake of completeness. On the left-hand side there, those two columns, the intelligent design and creation theory, or the superior entity theory, or the God hypothesis, whatever you want to call that, is that there was an eternal God who created these things. We'll again come back in a little bit and kind of precisely define that hypothesis again. But that there was a superior entity who created all that we see in the universe. An alternative theistic, you might say, or deity type explanation would be some of the ancient whimsical mythologies, the gods, Zeus, etc. Those are not seriously proposed, especially at this point in time. So I'm not going to list those. I note the existence of such ideas. Okay, how about some atheistic theories then? And that is to say, and we use all of these terms with complete respect. Atheist, theist, all of these, I hope you know that I mean those with complete respect. So don't anybody take any of the above as an insult, either to yourself or to anybody else. We intend to be fair, intellectually honest, and completely respectful with what we're doing. And inherent in that, of course, as we've discussed already, it is fine for us to debate ideas and to make logical arguments for and against some of these ideas. We have to be able to do that. But those criticisms will never be directed at the person holding the idea. That is not what we're here for. So we're going to keep ad hominem attacks out of it, and we're going to propose and maybe attack ideas, not people. All right. So some of these atheistic theories then we're about to get into in just a moment here. One is, there are some older ones, some alternative ones, etc. And as you're going to see currently, there's really not a prevailing hypothesis. Now that's okay if you honestly say, hey, I don't know. That's fine, that's an honest answer, but we have to take that into account. All right? But to come back and look at these in detail, what are we talking about here? If we're talking about all of the matter and energy in the universe, okay, what is that we're talking about? Now, look, I'm going to tell you this. We're going to take a very, very condensed, summarized, overly brief tour through this idea. And especially the one that we're going to consider in the latter half of our discussion tonight, this will be even more the case. I have struggled with this for weeks and weeks now of how to do this because I knew I couldn't do it justice. We could spend not just hour upon hour, we could spend the rest of our lives looking just at what mankind has already discovered about the vastness of this universe and what's in it. And believe me, there are a whole lot of people who could do a far better job than I can of showing you some of that and walking you through some of that. What I'm going to show you is going to be so inadequate. But the purpose is just for us to know what we're talking about here so that we can come then and home in on that idea of, okay, what are the competing theories and what makes sense? So let me just admit to you, I'm about to do a woefully inadequate job of this, but I hope it will be worth something to further our discussion. By the way, there are, hundreds of fantastic sources of this kind of thing you could look at. Pick up any kind of astronomy book or flip through on the web. You will be blown away if you haven't already seen what has now been observed about not just our solar system, our galaxy, the rest of the universe. And I'll tell you too, there was a sermon actually here with Bill Watkins several years ago. I think the title of it in the archives is "Who is So Great as Our God?" It was in 2010, the most recent time that I know he presented something like that. It was fantastic. I wanted to pull a clip of it and let him be a guest presenter and show you that, because he can do this so much nicer than I can. But it only had the audio, couldn't get it, and I did not want to make extra work for Bill by asking him to come and present that, although you and I would have both loved it. Let me just tell you this too. If you ever get a chance to go to a planetarium, do not miss that opportunity. You will be blown away. If you ever get to go to the Creation Museum, and look, even if you're not a believer and don't want to be, that's fine. Go to that museum and just look at the planetarium show, okay? It'll be worth every minute and every dollar that it costs. All right, but let's take a look at what we're considering here in just this brief way. How about this for starters? Just let's start with a tiny bit of perspective. A human body, typical adult human, and I'm going to put it in kilograms just because that's the way so much is done. The average adult is considered to weigh about 70 kilograms, which is 154 pounds, probably more familiar to most of us. Now, ladies, I know very well that you don't weigh 1 gram over 50 kilograms. I know you don't, not on any day in your life, okay? But some of us guys may weigh a little bit more than that. All right, so let's just say an average adult human, 70 kilograms. All right, how about this? Just again for a little bit of reference. If you take a fairly quick shower, the weight of water or the mass of water that you will run through between 60 and 80 kilograms. Yeah, every bit of your body weight and probably then some, and that's a real quick shower. If you're grubby or it's finally your relief for the day from the heat, if you stay in there, a few minutes extra, you can just about double that. 60 or 80 kilograms of water right there. And as you see, between 130, maybe 170 or 80 pounds of water. Now, that's kind of impressive. How about this then? How about the mass of the earth? Now that we've got a little reference for kilograms. How about almost 6 trillion kilograms? I mean, think what a boulder weighs. Think what a big fat shovel full of dirt weighs. Think what one telephone pole or your car or your house would weigh. Here's what the earth weighs. And just to give it some kind of perspective, there it is written all out at the bottom of the screen with all the zeros. And that's 21 zeros after the first 4 digits of kilograms. Just unbelievable. And much of that, of course, red hot molten metal in the middle of the earth that you hope you don't ever see in person. That would be called a volcano, and if you see it, that'll be the last picture you take, probably. But that just to give a little idea of what's in the earth. But the earth is a grain of sand. In the scheme of things, yes, this massive earth. This earth that even if there was an airplane that could do it nonstop, and we're getting close to that, from one side of the earth to exactly the other side would take you about 20 hours in flight to do that. It's still 16 hours from Los Angeles to Sydney. But yeah, this earth, pretty massive, and the number you see on the screen there for mass, but that's nothing. Because how about this? Now, you know that, I'm sure you figured out immediately that fiery ball you see in front of you is a filtered telescope picture of our sun. It's our own star, the one that sustains us, gives us life, and is responsible for all of the energy that we see on this earth, because ultimately everything is solar energy, whether it's a plant that you eat or the animal that you eat that ate the plant that got the energy from the sun, no matter what. This is our energy source, this is our heat, this is our life, okay? Now, you can't see it on here, but look up in the top right corner of that picture. You see the word earth. What you can't see, but you can pull this up even on your computer screen and see it. A tiny little dot, almost as big as the period at the end of a sentence, kind of. That's the earth as compared to the sun. All right, so we said the mass of the earth is about 6 trillion kilograms. Well, compare that to the sun. In fact, the sun contains 99.8% of the matter, the mass of our entire solar system. All the planets added up together make up 0.2% of the mass of the solar system. Yeah, the sun is almost 2 times 10 to the 30th power kilograms, or about 333,000 Earths in mass. The diameter of the sun, 109 times the diameter of Earth. And what that means, and you can check the calculation, is that about 1.3 million entire Earths would fit inside the sun. And in that sun could be as much as billions of degrees at the core, where you have a nonstop high power, understatement, nuclear fusion reaction going on, like a hydrogen bomb, continuously, pumping out more power every single second than thousands upon thousands of the most powerful hydrogen or atom bomb explosions ever known, every second pumping it out, to the extent that here, 93 million miles away, it'll burn you. In fact, for some of us with this color skin, it'll burn you pretty quick. But that's our sun. Unbelievable. But that's nothing. We're, even with our mighty star, the sun, that keeps this solar system going, we're one fish in a big pond. You look up at the sky on a clear night, and I hope you do that frequently because it will remind you of some things. But you look up at that sky, and on a clear night, if you looked for a while, you could pick out hundreds of stars, and you begin to see, wow, this is pretty vast. But have you ever seen what it looks like when you're not in the middle of the light pollution? First time I ever really saw it, I'd seen pictures of the Milky Way galaxy, and you kind of wonder why they call it that. Well, when you actually see it, you begin to understand how it got that name, because it really is like somebody poured a stream of milk across the sky. These are the ones that the ancients saw when Abraham or David looked up in the sky, or take any other ancient that you want. This is what they saw. The first time I ever saw it was when I went to Belize one time, the first time. We were out working in a little tiny village out in the middle of kind of nowhere. Not nowhere to these folks who lived there, but it was a long way from anything that appeared on the map. In fact, it was, at that time, such a small little village, there was no electricity there, and it was 28 miles away from the nearest little bit bigger village that actually did have some electric lights and whatnot. And out there, when the sun went down, there was nothing. There was nothing. Some of you may have been in a place like this before. In the U.S., it's hard to find a place like that. If you go out camping somewhere really remote, you might get far enough away from the lights to be able to see something like what you're seeing on the screen. This was taken at what's called a dark sky conservatory, this one in Idaho, I believe, where you get rid of a lot of the light pollution, although you can still see at the bottom there the glow from a couple of transmitting towers way off in the distance. But look up at that sky. That's your galaxy that you're looking at. And it does, for lack of a better term, they called it the Milky Way. That's our galaxy. Now that might be kind of what it looked like if you could take a selfie of our galaxy, which obviously you can't. We can see part of it spread across the sky like that. And in fact, the pattern of that light spread across the sky begins to tell you a little something about the kind of galaxy that we're in. So really, really good astronomers and astrophysicists and people 100 times smarter than me and in their own expertise field have shown us good evidence that this is the kind of galaxy we're in. A spiral galaxy. In fact, doesn't it kind of look like somebody did like that and set it in motion? In fact, we happen to be fairly far out on one of the arms of it, far away from the center, and where it starts thinning out a little bit, which in fact allows us to survive. in the middle of it or much closer in at all, the radiation would cook everything immediately, and the heat from the proximity of so many other stars. So we're toward the edge of that. Now, this happens to be a picture of another galaxy very much like ours, because obviously we would not have a distance picture of our own galaxy. So what's this galaxy like? Our spiral galaxy, this Milky Way, about 300 billion stars. And you know, we saw the massive size. Our star's not even a big one, really, in the scheme of things, but with the power, the mass, the energy, just unfathomable, and that's just from one star. Well, our galaxy has about 300 billion stars. And guess what? We're kind of on the small side, because the average galaxy is thought to have closer to 700 billion stars. Our nearest neighbor in this galaxy is the Alpha Centauri group, A and B, and they each have their own names as well. They're a binary pair, and then a red dwarf star that makes up the third one in that little group of stars, at a distance of roughly 4.3 light years. I think you probably know what a light year is. That's not a measurement of time, it's a measurement of distance. That is how far light can travel in 1 year. Now, if you remember, light and radio waves in a vacuum travel put it in miles, it's 186,000 miles per second, speed of light. And so 1 light year, if you multiply that out, is 5.879 trillion miles, which you see depicted on the bottom of the slide there. That's 1 light year. Well, that's our nearest neighbor. Multiply that number by a little over 4. And so that's about 24 trillion miles away from us, roughly. That's our nearest neighbor. And the Milky Way itself thought to be about 106,000 light years in distance across from one edge to the other of this kind of spiral flattened disk. But that's just our galaxy. That's just ours. And we knew that there were other galaxies because as telescopes got better and better, you started to see that what looked like a star was actually maybe more than a star once you could magnify it enough. So we began to see, and I say we, you know what I mean, the people who actually know what they're talking about and are good at this. I'm just reading, regurgitating what I can read. But we knew that there were other galaxies. We didn't really have any clue how many. And so finally they decided with the Hubble Space Telescope, they decided there was a whole section of the sky that was just the dark, the empty section of the sky. And they thought, well, that there is nothing out in that direction of the universe. But then somebody thought, well, you know what? Let's do a good old-fashioned time-lapse exposure of that. Let's just see, maybe there's some faint little star out there somewhere, whatever. So they trained the Hubble in that direction where there wasn't anything, and they took an exposure cumulatively for 100 hours in that direction of nothingness. Oh my goodness, here's what they found. And do you realize as you look at that, you see those little saucer-shaped discs, etc., and different shapes out there, etc.? Those aren't stars, those are galaxies. And that was in the area of the sky that they thought didn't have anything in it. So let's talk about now a good, confident estimate of probably at least 100 billion galaxies with an average of about 700 billion stars each. I told you ours is kind of a small galaxy, really below average. 70 billion trillion stars that we might conjecture are out there, many of them with planets around them even. And the nearest neighboring galaxy 25,000 light years away. And the next one after that, you see those signs on the highway, next rest stop, 64 miles, etc. Yeah, next galaxy, 25,000 light years. The one after that, 70,000 light years. I've done a very inadequate job, but do you get some sense that the amount of matter that's out there and every one of those stars burning, churning, and our sun still has enough fuel, even at the furious pace that it's carrying on this fusion reaction, still has enough fuel to keep it up at the same pace for another 2 to 3 billion years. Multiply that by 70 billion trillion stars. How did that happen? Well, here are your competing theories. Number one, there is a God who created it. Number two, after you discount some of the whimsical mythology stories that I mentioned to you. In fact, let me tell you a couple of these because they have changed a little bit based on really good observation and scientific deduction. It used to be thought that maybe if there was not a creator to it, the atheistic or naturalistic theories were that the universe was itself eternal. Instead of there being an entity that was eternal, just the universe was eternal. Now, obviously, the concept of eternity is far beyond human understanding. We can talk about it, but we cannot possibly understand the concept. But that maybe the universe itself was eternal and had kind of always been in this arrangement. Look, I'll be honest with you. You may say, oh, how can that be? Well, it's not crazier than the idea of a superior entity that is eternal. You know what I mean? Either one of those ideas, I couldn't say one made more sense than the other unless I had some other information to factor into my analysis. But if you just showed me that and I didn't know anything else, I find both of those are equally beyond my grasp and yours. Okay, no matter how smart you are. So I couldn't have really said, no, that can't be. I'd have to give it fair consideration. Well, the idea of, and I've labeled it as an old theory on there, the eternal existence of the universe in a steady state, because we now know that's not true, that it is not in a steady state. The universe is expanding, and there is very good evidence for that, strong evidence for that. And if it is expanding, then it started from some smaller, more dense condition and has not been eternally in the steady state. The final nail in the coffin of that just eternal steady state theory came in the 1960s with the discovery of something called cosmic background microwave radiation. It's an interesting thing if you're a nerd, and you want to look into that, etc. But it gave evidence that it was expanding, and then with observation of light color shifting in other galaxies, etc., it confirms that. So it hasn't always been in this condition or in the arrangement that it's in, and that gave rise to something often called a Big Bang theory. That is, that it had a beginning that started it expanding like it clearly is. Now, let me just mention this, because we're going to come back to this quite a bit later in our series. The Big Bang idea, or theory, hypothesis, that is this, beginning from one point of beginning to become what it is, that doesn't necessarily mean atheistic Big Bang theory. It often is implied to mean that, but it doesn't have to mean that. And in fact, there are an awful lot of people who really would love to find a better explanation than the Big Bang theory, because that Big Bang hypothesis is potentially very compatible with the account of creation given in Genesis. That makes a lot of people uncomfortable that things might actually point back to the idea that, yeah, there was a creator. So there are a lot of people who would love to find another explanation than that. But I'll just tell you right now, the prevailing thing is that there was an initial event, a Big Bang, that gave rise to all of this matter and energy and set it shooting outward to then form stars and galaxies and planets, etc. All right, there used to also be a thought, well, maybe it's a time loop sequence, kind of an oscillating sequence. There's a bang and the universe expands out and kind of then finally it runs out of expanding energy and it kind of loses steam and it begins to fall back in. Kind of like if you toss a ball up in the air, depending on how hard you throw it, it'll go up to a certain distance, it'll slow down, it'll come to a stop, and then it'll start falling back down again. That's the idea, gravity, okay? That eventually the universe kind of runs out of expanding energy and then it'll begin to fall back in on itself until it all the way back in, compacts itself back, and then bangs out, explodes outward again. So kind of a never-ending sequence of bangs and recollapses. Well, that theory has now been discarded as well, because the universe is expanding fast enough that it has escaped the confines of gravity. Just like something can eventually, with enough rocket power, it can escape the gravity of Earth and then it can keep going. It won't fall back after a certain point. Well, the universe has achieved what you might call an escape velocity. It's not heading back in, and it's not going to. In fact, it's expanding faster than it used to be, if that makes sense. So that theory is not really in existence anymore. So what we're down to right now, other than a creator, is one of two things. And by the way, we'll come back to this later on. There is also a theory that there could be multiple universes that we're not able to see. We can only see the one that we're in, but that there are multiple parallel universes. That doesn't factor into what we're saying at the moment, because where would those have come from? So we'll come back to that idea. So kind of for the beginning, the initial existence of the universe, we're left with one of a couple of things. What we were left with, other than a creator hypothesis, was we don't really know. There was a big bang, but we don't know what caused it. And some people would add, but we know it wasn't a creator, okay? But we don't know what it was, but we know it wasn't that, because we're not willing to consider that, so that can't be. So, but we don't know what it was. Okay, well look, at least I'll take the first half of that. We don't know what caused it. I'll take that as an honest answer at least. If you pair it with, but it couldn't be that, well then no, you're just refusing to consider things you don't like. And we've talked about that. There is another very recent addition to the mix of possible hypotheses here, and that is one that was introduced by Professor Stephen Hawking and a co-author named Leonard Mlodinow, and I may be butchering his name with apologies, that the universe actually spontaneously created itself. All right? Let me just say, it deserves our fair, respectful consideration, like every idea does. All right? So, if those are the things that we have to choose between, then let's take a look at those. And what I want to do is first take a look at this idea from Professor Hawking and see what we can make of that. And for each idea we look at with each of these questions, I want us then to subject it to kind of a scorecard, you might say. How does it measure up against our method for determining reasonableness and truth? Here's a quote and at the end of an explanation about it. And Professor Hawking says, well, you know, I've worked out some equations. I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but I'm not interjecting anything disrespectful here. Basically, he says, I've worked out some equations with what we think, string theory and M theory might be, and they show that given what little we understand about gravity, then this is that the universe probably created itself. Well, that's kind of a bold statement. I think you could agree. But so here's kind of their combining quote from this. This is from a book called The Grand Design, published in 2010 by Stephen Hawking and Leonard Mlodinow. You see the quote on your screen. Because there is a law such as gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing. Now, notice what he says, then he shifts into not just that it could happen, but this is what happened, all right? Spontaneous creation is the reason there is something rather than nothing. Why the universe exists, why we exist. And then he adds, it is not necessary to invoke God to light the blue touch paper, that is kind of like to light the fuse, and set the universe going. So Professor Hawking's hypothesis then is based on reasoning that no one else had thought of before, that the universe, he says, not just could create itself. He said, oh, it did. It did. That's why we're here. All right, well, let's make a little hypothesis scorecard with this idea. Direct experimental testing. You know, we've said when you can employ the scientific method, direct experimental testing, those are the only things that by strictest definition qualify as science. Okay, that's it. That's the definition. So is that possible? Well, no, obviously not. There is no experiment any of us could run to determine whether this is the way the universe came into existence. And you see, pretty much everybody is agreed now. Like I said, it did come into existence where it wasn't before. The question is how, okay? All right, so that's not possible. Critical analysis then must be applied to whatever additional sources of evidence and logic we can have. How about this then? How about evidence from direct observation? Could we apply direct observation to his theory? Well, no, nobody was there to see it happen. If it happened, whether or not it happened the way he says, no one was there to see it. So that's out of the question as well. It would have been good. All right. How about compatibility of the hypothesis with observed phenomena? All right, we can consider that for sure. How many times do you know of something creating itself? I'm not being silly. I'm being just as serious as Professor Hawking was. How many times do you know of anything creating itself or coming into existence spontaneously? Ever observed that? Or has thousands of years of human experience and observation told you that doesn't happen? Okay, remember what we said a few weeks ago? You're allowed to use your brain. You're allowed to use common sense. You're allowed to use observation and reality. You don't have to leave those things at the door and believe whatever you're told. So I think, with all respect, we would have to ask Professor Hawking some questions about this hypothesis. You notice he said, because there is a law such as gravity, the universe can and will create. He doesn't explain how that is or why that is. But I would ask this, first of all, well, if there was nothing, how was there a law such as gravity? If there was no universe, if there was truly nothing and endless nothingness, why would you say there was a law such as gravity? Why wouldn't there just be a law of repulsion instead of attraction? So he doesn't even seem to realize the necessity of addressing that question. Okay, he just, it's the law, so. It's a law in the universe that we see, but when there was, you get the picture. Second, here's the obvious. Professor, where's the support for this idea other than you thought it up, and certainly had the temerity to write it down and publish it and claim that that's what happened? I will tell you this also, and again, not that it's a consensus or a popularity contest or because you can find plenty of opinions for or against anything that you want to look at. But his hypothesis, even among the staunchest atheists, materialists, naturalists, etc., astrophysicists, you name it, was met with tremendous skepticism, I may say is an understatement, that there were an awful lot of people who would probably have loved to believe it, but said, okay, you've gone too far. There is, and this is a correct observation, there is absolutely nothing to support this idea. Absolutely nothing except the mind of Professor Stephen Hawking. There is no support. There is no evidence of any type. Now, a person who was interested in philosophy of thought too might say, well, you know what, according to Karl Popper and some of these ideas, we can only consider things that can be falsified. That is, they could potentially be disproven. You're not asking us to believe something we have no way of considering. Excuse me. All right, well, that's not an absolute, but it is a good principle whenever you can do that. Could we potentially disprove this theory? Nope. Except for one thing. Now, I think we should consider it anyway. But I will say this, to the extent that you could think of a method to test this theory or potentially falsify it, possibly disprove it, might be this. What if you could build a chamber with absolute vacuum, nothingness? You would then need to shield that chamber from any possible outside energy, etc. You'd have to put it in a thick lead vault, perhaps, so that no radiation, no light, no motion, no heat, nothing could enter it. You would have to try to simulate complete absence of anything, the nothingness of prior to the universe existing, and then see what creates itself. I mean, I'd settle for a grain of sand or a tiny drop of water. If you can get that to truly create itself, then I'll be listening a lot more seriously. But there is no evidence of any type, and to the extent that this can be tested against reason, it doesn't stand up to reason. Where's logic? So, nice idea, but at least for the moment, you cannot consider it as any kind of a logical possibility. So it brings us back then to this on the naturalistic side. We don't know. There was a Big Bang, but we don't know what caused it. We're searching. Again, I'll take that as an honest answer. It's not an impressive one, but I'll take it as honest, though. We don't know. All right. But it's hard to evaluate we don't know. It's hard to compare the validity of one hypothesis of a superior entity that created this versus we don't have a hypothesis. And I'm not being disrespectful here, but you see what I mean. Because here's the creation or intelligent design, superior entity, God hypothesis. A supernatural and eternally existing entity created all that physically exists. And this entity created the laws of nature or the laws of physics, etc., and therefore alone has the power to override them if desired. Now, you can either like or not like that hypothesis. I mean, that's okay. You can't refuse to consider it if you're an honest thinker who claims to be seeking the truth. It is a reasonably proposed, seriously proposed hypothesis. And here's the thing. You can't disprove, much less prove, any of the above hypothesis without some other way of confirmation. So at the stage we're at right now, with the information that we have to consider just at this first question, you can't disprove or prove any of the above, in any demonstrable way, but you can use logic. See, each one of these things involves things that are beyond human understanding and possibly something eternal. So the question is, which makes the most sense? And what does it tell us when currently there is no serious atheistic theory to consider? It's we don't know, but we know there was no creator. I think if we cut that off at we don't know, at least I would feel like, okay, well, there's an honest answer at the moment. And I'd be willing to give consideration to any future hypotheses that come along. So at the moment, we're left to decide, all right, we're down to two, really. There is a superior entity who created all that there is, or we don't know. All right? Let's keep both of those in mind as possibilities. I mean, if you can say it's a possibility to say we don't have a hypothesis, but still, let's just keep that in mind. And then as we see evidence for the remaining three questions, I think we may see things then that can feed information back to us to further address our analysis of this first question. But at this point already, there should be 100 thoughts running through your mind about critical analysis of the idea of an entity, superior entity created this versus we don't have a hypothesis for this right now. Okay, I think that's something pretty substantial to reflect on even right now. All right, so we come then to the second main question, the incredible precision and organization of the universe as it is. How did that happen? And again, one of the old theories was, well, it was a random arrangement in a steady state. And of course, we now know that's not the case. There is another idea that we live, I alluded to this a little while ago, that we live in simply one universe out of a multitude of other universes, perhaps. We'll give some thought to that, although, there's no way you can even begin to evaluate that other than just as a thought experiment. But the main atheistic theory is it was a random explosion, this Big Bang. There was nothing guiding it, it just exploded, and this, from a finite beginning, cause unknown, and it's currently expanding, and it just randomly landed the way that it is. Okay, that's a fair hypothesis to consider. We're going to consider that. We must give that full, serious, respectful consideration. Or that there was the entity who created this, arranged it the way that it is, and made it appear with the precision that it has. And we're about to look into that next Sunday evening when we pick up this topic again, because it is a most unlikely, precisely arranged universe and solar system and planet. If you remember the old story of Goldilocks, in each case, she finally found something that was just right. Goldilocks would be extremely happy with our universe, with our solar system, with our planet, and the precise conditions that it has that could actually support life, because it's very unlikely. But that's what we're going to look at next time. And we're going to pick this up then next Sunday evening. I hope that you might be kind enough to join us again, and I hope that you might find it worth your time. And we're going to start next Sunday evening then with this idea, this question, and something called the anthropic principle. So if you're really a glutton for punishment, you can even look that up and start reading about it between now and then. We'll cover that quickly among many other things. And then look into the idea of how did the universe get this way. Thank you for joining us this evening. I hope that there is some value in this. I know there's probably at this point 2 people watching, and I thank both of you. The 3 of us, at least, we'll just have nerd delight here. But I hope that this is of some use to you. I would love to hear from you, and especially if anybody listening can find a flaw in my logic and point it out to me, I will not only be eagerly interested in that conversation, but I will be grateful to you and will enjoy talking about it. Thank you again. Hope you have a great week ahead.
Thank you for joining us online. Please join us again for our next service. Worship services are in person and online Sunday mornings at 8:15 and 10 o'clock. Masks are required at the 8:15 service. Masks are strongly recommended at the 10 o'clock service. Bible study is online only Sunday evenings at 5 o'clock. Summer series is online only Wednesday evenings at 6:30. You can also watch our daily devotionals and other special presentations on Facebook at the Creve Hall COC videos page. Again, thank you for joining us online.